Right now, let's talk about the Rwanda migrant boats policy. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, over the weekend has been visiting Rwanda, looking at some of the housing developments supposed to house Channel migrants who are deported to Rwanda without any right of appeal until they have left the country. And even then, actually not a right to return to the UK. She has been accused of human rights violations, breaching our asylum obligations under international law, and a huge amount of criticism. Let's talk about this to Steve Valdez-Symonds. He's Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty UK. Good morning to you, Steve.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's just have watch and listen to a little clip of Suella Braverman encouraging critics to visit Rwanda for themselves. Here's what she had to say.
I encourage all of my critics to actually visit Rwanda before they cast aspersions and throw around incredibly prejudiced and snobbish opinions about what this beautiful country has to offer.
Prejudiced and snobbish opinions, a lot of the critics of this policy. Do you agree, Steve?
No. Amnesty has been following Rwanda for many years and continues to do so. It has a shockingly bad human rights record. It is heavily implicated in ongoing conflict in eastern DRC, causing thousands and thousands of people to be refugees. It has a lot to answer for in terms of horrible repression, particularly of free speech and journalists. It is a totalitarian regime, and this country is both embarrassing itself and doing a gross disservice to international law respect by giving credibility to the regime simply so this country can try and absolve itself of its own human rights, particularly refugee responsibilities.
If it's such a bad country, why does the UN, why has the UN approved people to be sent there?
The UN has made an arrangement with Rwanda, not for people to be simply sent to Rwanda, but to help it desperately resettle from Libya people trapped there to other countries. And the UN has not supported this deal. It's been absolutely plain that this deal is unlawful. It has criticised the idea that Rwanda could possibly cope with what it has signed up to. And the UN has also been heavily critical of Rwanda's meddling in conflict and political persecution in the region.
The trouble is, you say, whether Rwanda can cope. A lot of British people, all the people listening to this and watching this right now, will say, well, we can't cope either. Tens of thousands of young men arriving on our shores. We understand some 90% of them throw away their passports, throw away their documentation, staying here, living in hotels. I mean, largely that's down to the abject failures of the Home Office in processing their applications. But a huge number of them do get granted the right to stay. And I think an awful lot of people have some big question marks about those decision-making processes when they do finally get to being decided. And a lot of British people say, I'm sorry, if you're that desperate, why are you not staying in France? You're not desperate at the point you get on that dinghy and pay 3, 4, 5 grand to a people trafficker. And if you really are that desperate about persecution at home or living in a war-torn country, then you'll be perfectly happy to be somewhere that is certainly safer than, Libya or Syria to be in Rwanda. And a lot of British people will say, sorry, it's not ideal, but that's as good as it gets, mate. What do you say to that?
Well, it's true. Several British people do say those things.
Quite a lot of British people say that.
Some British people do so, and some people say it very vocally. They are encouraged to do so, no doubt, by many people, including Suella Braverman and the government. But the reality is that this country is perfectly capable of coping, should it wish to, with the rather limited number of people who ever seek asylum here.
Limited?
Yes, we receive very few people by comparison to many other countries, including France and Germany and most of our European neighbours. We actually proportionally receive very few people into our asylum system compared to Rwanda. The truth is that the Home Office has absolutely wrecked our asylum system. I'm quite agreeing that people should be outraged at the impact that has and the cost of it, not to mention the horrible impact for the people who have to suffer it. But the answer to that is not to make things even worse by trying to avoid our responsibilities, give even more control to human traffickers and people smugglers and exploiters in this country, and create an environment, frankly, which the government is threatening, in which more people will take dangerous journeys to avoid the authorities here and hide in this country, which will do them no good and nobody else good. Instead, we should simply take the responsibilities that come our way. Other countries do so with no more resources than us and to far greater extent.
Honest question. Do you want, 20 young Channel migrant men who've paid people traffickers to come from wherever they've come from, to get on the boat in Calais? Do you want them to come and live next door to you? I don't really. And I'm assuming that will make me apparently a xenophobic, bigot, racist or whatever. Couldn't care where they're from. I'm just not sure I do.
Well, I am quite comfortable with the idea of people living in my neighbourhood who have sought asylum, and I would encourage everyone else to think likewise. I know many people in this country who do think likewise. We have a very large supporter and membership base at Amnesty who are very supportive of refugees and people seeking asylum. As for the victims of human traffickers, of course, no one wants to see people who are being exploited in their neighbourhood. We don't want to see people being trafficked across the world at all. That is a completely different issue, in fact, and it's a great shame that government continues to mix the two, because, of course, those who are trafficked into this country, it's not a question of them seeking asylum anywhere else. They are under the control of people. They're being moved across borders to be exploited.
In some cases, and others... In others,
that is
not.
What human trafficking is, Julia.
Well, I know what human trafficking is, but a lot of people in those...
We talk about human trafficking. We must understand what the two things are.
There is human trafficking. There are also people who are wanting either they are seeking asylum here of their own volition, or they are economic migrants coming of their own volition. Either way, a lot of people would say, and I'm among them, you're already in France. Pretty nice country,
I'm
pretty
very sorry.
safe
We
country.
need to nail this. If someone is trafficked into this country, they are being controlled in the movement. That has nothing to do with...
How do you know these people are being trafficked into this country if they paid 3, 4, 5 grand to a people trafficker?
You don't understand what trafficking is. You may be talking about people smuggling, which is itself a serious crime, which, of course, probably does dominate what happens across the Channel.
Exactly.
But at the moment, well, you say exactly, but you're talking about trafficking in the same breath. At the moment, the government is legislating to say that anyone trafficked into this country is to be permanently barred and expelled, whatever has happened to them. And yet the truth of the matter is that the victims of trafficking who are there being targeted have absolutely no choice about the journeys that are being made.
Yeah.
So it is incredibly important that we should understand the distinction between the two. Of course, I also support the rights of the people seeking asylum who are smuggled into this country.
But that's the thing, isn't it? I completely understand the difference, but the trouble is actually an awful lot of the people who are saying they've got a problem with this law, they also don't have a problem with economic migrants coming to this country because they want a better life. And the argument then is always, well, how many are we going to take?
We should receive into our asylum system the people who arrive and deal with their claims fairly and efficiently as best as we can. That is what is expected. Okay. It's what we as a nation expect of others. Why on earth should we not do the same?
I want to ask you about some of the photographs of Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary in Rwanda. Here's a photograph, and if you're listening rather than watching, it's a photograph of Suella Braverman at a housing unit in Rwanda, which is being built to house migrants who are deported there. This image is an image of her laughing, head back, laughing really very joyously. People are saying, look, this is an outrageous image of her and being happy about people being smuggled, people being deported to Rwanda. That picture then got doctored and changed on social media yesterday. Some people imposing her picture on the outside of the Auschwitz concentration camp next to the railway lines, laughing about this, making a comparison effectively with Nazi concentration death camps extraordinarily. And in fact, the wider picture, if we go back to the picture of her on her own, the wider picture is actually of her with two Rwandans at the housing building site and laughing with them. A very, very different picture in context. Steve Valdez-Symonds, what did you make of that and how that picture was doctored online?
I think it's a great pity that people feel the need to go to the extent of cropping pictures and misrepresenting the context of them. Quite frankly, Suella Braverman is awful all by herself. And if we only concentrate on actually understanding what she says and her policies in their proper context, I think it would be much better for all of us. So no, I understand why people get outraged by some of what is done with images such as this, particularly putting her outside a Nazi concentration camp. So I'm not for that. I'm happy to condemn that. But I do wish that actually more of us would concentrate on what really is going on. Which, as I say, if we look at the full context of it, see what is happening in Rwanda and also in our own country, then maybe we can address that.
Isn't that what the government's trying to do? You're saying she is awful all by herself. Her policy has huge public support. Maybe not at the dinner parties you attend, but actually I've already had some MPs messaging in saying, you know, you should come and walk around their local constituencies and talk to people to get a reality check.
Can I just share one example from her current legislation? She has produced a bill that, if it is passed, will make a British person who is either trafficked into this country or born in this country to someone who has been trafficked, deprived of their citizenship and deprived of ever being able to be permitted to stay in this country. A British person. She is so beyond understanding the laws that she is responsible for, both our domestic ones, our very citizenship, let alone the international ones, that she is producing legislation like this. And yes, many people support it because they clearly do not see the context of what is going on, perhaps partly because they see silly images like the ones you presented, rather than us having a focused debate on what actually is being done.
Steve Valdez-Symonds, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Amnesty UK, Sir Steve Valdez-Symonds.